So, if you can remember on the last video, we were talking about the employment relations approach as a distinct approach, as something that provides us with a different kind of insight into what goes on in the work relations in organisations, in the relationship between employers and employees. And what I want to do in this video is to flesh that out a bit in terms of the specific perspective that employment relations offers and about how that is different. So, as far as the employment relations approach is concerned, one of the key concepts is power. Now, this again is something that we don't talk about a lot in terms of human resource management. We talk about authority, we kind of sanitize it. But what we're talking about in the relationship between employers and employees is a power relationship. And understanding the dynamics of power, and particularly the balance of power between employers and their employees, provides us with a particular insight. It lets us understand what's going on underneath the surface in a way that we simply miss if we ignore the power dynamics. So that's what we're going to focus on today. The power dynamics, the power balance between employers and employees, and how that plays out, where it comes from, and what happens as a result of those power dynamics. So, much of the issues around the balance of power in the employment relationship stems from the nature of the bargain between employers and employees. Now, when we say bargain, we contract to sell our labour. And when we think about a contract for sale, in most areas, there's a degree of certainty involved. If we buy a house, we may not know everything about that house, but we've had a survey done, we've gone to view it, we've gone through the process of having a fairly clear sense of what we're getting for our money. And we do that with any other kind of purchase. We purchase a commodity, we know what we're getting, and there are certain rights and obligations involved in protecting us as a consumer in relation to that. The purchase of labour is entirely different. Now, we may, go through all kinds of processes in terms of employee resourcing. We set up a job description, we have criteria for selection, we specify the duties and responsibilities of a role, and we do due diligence in terms of selecting and recruiting employees before they come into our organisation. But despite all of that, one of the things that characterises the buying and selling of labour is this thing that employment relations scholars called indeterminacy. We don't really know what we're going to get. One of the central problems of managing people at work is managing performance. And there's a reason why organisations have spent the best part of a century trying to come up with new and innovative ways in order to kind of tighten down on what it is that we get from our employees. Now, the problem with that is that by tightening down on the kind of performance that we want from our employees, we lose things at the other end. So the more that we specify, say if we're McDonald's and we specify exactly how a job is going to be done, what we can't have at the same time as that is innovation and creativity, some of the things that other organisations want in spades, that they're the things that actually provide value for the organisation. So there's something uncertain, indeterminate in the nature of human labour power, the capacity to work. So employers may purchase someone's labour power. They may buy that person's time, but what exactly they're getting for their money is much more uncertain than it is in other areas of this type. So there's uncertainty built into the very essence of the relationship between employers and employees. Employees might have a very clear idea about what their rates of pay are going to be, what their rewards are going to be, but employers have much less certainty what exactly they're going to get for that money. So that uncertainty kind of provides the basis, the context for how this relationship works out. It's not clear, it's not tied down, it's more fluid. Another aspect of the power dynamics between employer and employee are the basic sources of strength, sources of power between employers and employees. One kind of general rule that is a fairly obvious thing when we come to think about it is that within an employment relationship, employers tend to be more powerful than employees. Employers hold most of the cards most of the time. They own the organisation, they have all kinds of property rights, property laws, which are based around protecting their property. They have the whole organisational machine, a phalanx of management who are there to make sure that their interests are carried out. An organisation is usually in a fairly dominant position in relation to employees within labour markets. So whilst there are many millions of potential labourers, potential employees at any point in time, there's a much smaller number of organisations who are looking for labour. So in terms of buyers and sellers, it's usually a buyer's market. Just in general sense, never mind the kind of fluctuations of, kind of tighter or looser labour supply, employers usually have the upper hand. They have a greater range of potential employees to choose from than employees have to choose from employers from which to work for. So that basic power inequality tends to see things falling in employers' favour. And sometimes that is more extreme. So in periods of fairly high unemployment where labour supply is plentiful, organisations have got complete freedom. They can always go out and more or less replace their entire workforce if they chose to do so, particularly if that workforce hasn't got any particularly rare or valuable skills. It can swing in the opposite direction. So there may be periods where in the economic cycle where labour supply tightens and an organisation has to do much more work to try and hang on to its employees. The balance of power shifts a little bit in the employee's favour. More so if the employees organise themselves. And they can try to, when the setting up of a union is essentially the same operation that we've seen going on for hundreds of years since the time of the medieval guilds. What we're seeing is an attempt to control labour supply, that if you want this work, you have to be part of this group. And so the control of labour supply, the control of rates of pay for certain types of labour in the hands of one organised group increases the power of labour. And we see the seesaw between labour and capital shift a little bit in the other's favour. So we see all of these things going on. It might be about a change in government, from a government which is in favour of market forces to one which is in favour of greater regulation. And so we might see more control of wages, control of discrimination, the regulation of organisations' ability to just do what they want. So all of these factors, the context, the internal labour markets, the external labour markets, the operation of trade unions, all of these things fluctuate and build in a dynamism. So this dynamism in power inequality between employers and employees is often manifested in patterns of what we might call conflict and cooperation within the employment relationship. that the way that the employment relationship functions within an organization reflects these patterns of power inequality. How strong is the employer? How strong are employees? What is the approach that each side has taken towards each other? And this can play out in different ways. So as an example here, there's a clip from Amazon. There was a bit of a controversy a couple of years ago about the way that Amazon were treating its employees. Not the warehouse employees that we see day in, day out, but these were the more highly skilled headquarters staff. There's a longer clip available on a longer article to accompany this clip on Blackboard, which details some of the background. But this is about the mistreatment of highly skilled, highly valuable employees in the Amazon headquarters. Have a look at this clip, read the article, and we'll come back to that to kind of unpick how some of these ideas about conflict and cooperation, patterns of inequality, might help us interpret and understand the features of the employment relationship here.
Consumers love to think of Amazon as a retailer that has everything, but there has long been another characterization of the company and CEO Jeff Bezos: harsh and extremely demanding. A New York Times story published Saturday was particularly critical of the company's management style, calling it a bruising workplace. The report detailed instances where employees were criticized for poor work performance while battling cancer, and at least one woman was forced to go on a business trip the day after having a miscarriage. Like we said, this kind of critique of Amazon has become pretty routine. Headlines spanning several years call it ruthlessly intimidating, brutal, and a prison. But the narrative of Amazon's harsh work environment and Bezos being a corporate oppressor is quite different than Amazon's consumer-facing image. We see positive stories all the time about Amazon's efforts to make drone delivery a reality and how the company has pressured the FCC into moving forward with commercial drone regulations. Even before Transparent was nominated for all those Emmys, gushing reviews helped put Amazon's young video streaming service on the map. Not to mention all the praise Bezos gets for disrupting the traditional retail market and making Amazon an industry innovator. But then a story like The Times pops up and Amazon is back under fire by the internet. So far, the bouts of bad press haven't done much to slow Amazon down. The company is still valued at $248 billion.
So, having looked at those resources, what's going on within Amazon? How can we understand these patterns of conflict and cooperation? How does it help us? How does it help us make sense of what's going on within this organization? How might these patterns of conflict and cooperation play out within the employment relationship? So if we were to think about this and think about the potential for cooperation here, so there's some awful things happening. Why might employees put up with this? Why might employees see, despite all of this, that actually working for Amazon still is advantageous, something that you put up with, you take the rough with the smooth. So it may be that employees might take the idea that Amazon's a successful company. It is advantageous for them to basically hitch their success to the success of Amazon as an organization. There might be awful things that happen, but those can be kind of folded under and accepted because there are other things that are advantageous. So you buckle down, you work hard, you succeed, you can build a career within a strong, financially successful organization like Amazon. It's the kind of thing that we see in startup organizations, often a lot of the time in the technology sector. Really hard work expected of employees. No real certainty about what it is that they have to do from day to day. It's a little bit of everything. Everybody has to kind of knuckle down and muck in and do everything that they possibly can to help the organization succeed. Now, on the face of this sounds, kind of like a horribly unsustainable way to work. it's a lot of effort, it's not a lot of freedom, it's a lot of demands from the organization on your time and your family and all of those other things. So why might employees do this? Well, there's a trade-off. For an organization like Amazon, particularly if you're one of the early group of employees, it may be that your rewards aren't simply about the pay that you receive, but about share options. And it may be that you're inclined to behave as if you're working for a startup organization because essentially you are. That you have share options from the early days of an organization that then achieves huge success. You get these kind of hockey stick growth curves. And so all of that hard work, all of that lack of freedom, all the horribleness is traded off against really significant financial success. So the organization's success is also your own success. A cooperative, mutually beneficial relationship between employer and employee. What if the situation isn't like that? So Amazon isn't a startup. Many people, anybody who's joined Amazon in the last 10 years is not one of those favored group who are, kind of busting a gut, but because they know that at some point they can cash in and make themselves cash millionaires. You're just doing it for a wage. You may get share options, but the days of hockey stick growth for a company like Amazon are far in the past. So in that situation, you're still expected to exhibit all of these behaviors. You're still expected to behave as if you're working for a startup, but the rewards aren't there to follow. You're just effectively an exploited employee. So what do we see the employment relationship in that situation playing out like? It's not like kind of cooperative, mutually beneficial sets of outcomes that we might have seen described before. It's different. Employees have different options. If they feel they're just being exploited, treated badly for no particular outcome, what options are available to them? They're never going to be able to cash out. They're never going to be able to kind of trade it all off against some life-changing set of rewards in the future. What can they do? They might leave. They might seek revenge. They might sabotage. They might organize and try and alter the balance of power in order to achieve more equitable, more humanistic forms of management. So the patterns of the employment relationship are governed by the context. They're governed by the balance of power between employer and employee. In some circumstances, despite some quite horrible experience at work, we might still regard these as cooperative forms of employment relations. But in other contexts, it's simple exploitation. It's simply a conflict-driven employment relation strategies. Now, when we're looking at this example of Amazon, we are looking at very highly skilled, talented, desirable employees. And of course, the workforce is made up of, by and large, much less talented and much more low-skilled employees. What opportunities have those people got? So one of the things that we have seen over the course of the neoliberal period is that we've seen a growth in these conflict-driven strategies, partly because employees have become generally weaker. Employees' organizations, trade unions, have become smaller. They have less influence. We have governments that are less inclined to enforce employment regulations, more inclined to follow the needs of the market and allow organizations to operate as they see fit. And so we've seen a growth in kind of conflict-driven employment relations strategies. Now, part of this is about the experience of work from an employee perspective, about whether it's a fulfilling and ethical way of employees experiencing work. But another issue about these conflict and cooperative employment relations strategies is that they have an effect on the behavior of employees. Cooperative strategies tend to produce contented, motivated, high-performing employees, creative employees, and some organizations place a premium on achieving those kinds of behaviors. Conflict-driven strategies don't have those kinds of advantages. Conflict-driven strategies are driven by cost control. It's hard HRM in other language. But those conflict-driven strategies come at a cost. The kinds of positive employee behaviors that employers often value simply aren't there when we have a conflict-driven strategy. And we can see that in some of these trends. We can look at, in this first graph, a period governed by a more highly regulated approach to managing the labour market, and we see productivity growth achieving a certain rate. And then we see a change in government at this point. And what happens to productivity? It drops way below the trend line. And so we can see within an economy that the looser regulation allowing employers to pursue these more conflict-driven strategies has a profound drop-off driven by changes of behaviour on the part of employees. And we can see that when we compare economies as well, that more highly regulated economies where a more cooperative employment relationship is maintained because of that regulation have higher rates of productivity and performance than other economies that take a different approach. So these features of the employment relationship are part of that kind of complex pattern that we've been talking about, that the employment relationship isn't straightforward, it's not simple, and that one of the kind of dynamic, ever-changing aspects of it is about power. And it's about the capacity of one side or the other to enforce their will on the other, and the other side to resist the will of the other side. It's not like a kind of human resource management pipe dream where everybody can just sort of buy in to the competitive desires of the organization. There's an inbuilt antagonism within the employment relationship. We're not all after the same thing all at the same time. Paul Edwards has described this as structured antagonism, that the antagonism is always there, but there's a capacity to mold and change and manage and regulate this antagonism. And that's the thing that we're going to look at in the next video, the extent to which we can manage this basically conflictual process to achieve a kind of employment relationship that we desire.